So we're going to now go and we're going to hear from reality girl Zine, who is from the USA. She wrote and illustrated a zine in the hopes of starting conversations about why so many girls are deciding they'd rather be boys. She became convinced she was trans as an adult with emotional problems, and her doctor and psychiatrist were quick to put her on hormones. She was what would be called a gender non-conforming teen in the 90s and was bullied daily until dropping out of high school. This and other things led to a mental breakdown in 2017. Around the time she realized trans was a medical scandal, her teenage daughter also came out as trans. And this is when Reality Girl really woke up. And this zine is based on her life, or your life, because you're here, many hours of reading and talking with other detransitioners. So it's fantastic, the zines, because I've seen bits of it. Thank you so much for coming. Welcome and thanks for making the zine. When did you make it and when did you finish it?
It kind of all came out in one afternoon, like an explosion. And at that point, I thought, you know what, I really want to get this out and not worry about if it looks perfect. So I just put out that version, like, you know, immediately. And that was probably a couple of years ago now. And then I kind of refined it a little bit since then and tried to like add the points that I thought were the most important and take out anything that was redundant and try the point of it. So I made it so that I can print it off easily at home. And then it weighs just, I think it's 1 ounce. So I can mail it with 1 postage stamp. And I have been mailing it to people of influence, like school committee members, clinicians, anyone that I think is working with this population. Just to be, you know, to just insert the question in their mind, you know, and kind of give them the idea that like, oh, people are questioning this and it's okay to question it. In 2017, the end of 2017, I think I had like a real mental breakdown, and some of that stuff that she said in the introduction, you know, like I was bullied out of high school, and that really never, you know, that always stays with you in some level. And then when my kids were little, their dad died, and he was really like the only stability that I'd ever experienced in life. And then he died and I was left with 2 little children. So I had issues from that. And it was kind of like 10 years after he died that I had this complete mental breakdown. And I think that like whatever the foundations of my personality were not like strong. So when I cracked it, like cracked all the way down to the bottom, and I was very vulnerable. And I happened to run into 2 transgender people right at that point. And that's when I found out like, oh, like this is something that's available to anyone. Like I could just go to my doctor and basically change into a different person. And because I was suicidal, it was like, you know, it sounded amazing. And because I'm like an artistic and creative person, it became like this huge project, you know, like renovating a house or something. And I just like, it seemed like a really cool, like fascinating, magical thing that I could do and escape being this person that I was. And so at just the timing of it, I think when I was so vulnerable to find that out, I became obsessed. You know, I watched every YouTube video. I went to my doctor and they put me on testosterone. She made me wait 2 weeks because she knew that I had been like the week before, like, I need to go to inpatient care because like my medication isn't working. And I lost like 25 pounds in a month, you know. So that was going on. I think that was about 8 to 12 months I was on testosterone. And then around that time, my child, she came out as trans. And then, you know, that's when I really did a 180 because, you know, I didn't care what happened to my body, but I do care what happens to her. You know, what I went through with my kid were like the medical people and the school and the town, people in the town were like taking my daughter, and somebody called DCYF. I'm still really terrified of these people. Like I cannot bring myself to go to the school and confront them directly. So yeah, when I was a kid, it was these fashion magazines that gave everyone a mental breakdown because it was before social media. So that's why I put Cosmo.
So these are referring to, you know, you said before, you're talking about the 90s, before the internet.
Yeah.
I think that's important to situate. your artwork and your orientation to, to time, because things have changed in my lifetime, have changed radically.
Yeah, I know. I
You know?
probably should have made this more like a social media image for the younger people, but I mean, this is something from my life. I always had these Vogue and Cosmos around, and I would just make myself fucking sick looking at them, I don't know why.
Yeah.
Oh, and as a side note, I was a stripper for a while. When I moved to New York City, I had like $800, which I thought was a lot of money at the time. And I immediately ran out of money and became a stripper. So I spent a little bit of time in the skin trade as well.
Let's see the next one. Could it be?
So this was like my high school experience. Everyone thought I was a lesbian and a Satanist. So I was harassed every day in and out of school.
A Satanist, not like.
Yeah, I listened to a lot of punk rock music, and I I brought in like The Damned for Music Appreciation Day, and one of their lyrics is about priests hanging on hooks or something. So then I was Satan from then on. I hit puberty really late, so I was androgynous, and my friend cut off all my hair. So I mean, I was like, gender nonconforming before we called it that.
Yeah, exactly. And was this in a city or in a smaller community where
Small town? And that was just about, when you're a teenager walking around town and men are always sexually harassing you and being creepy. And this one is just describing like, you get all these different messages like, don't be too fat, don't be too skinny, don't be too loud, don't be too quiet, and it's just like the relief that I felt when I just was like, oh, none of this applies to me anymore because I'm a man now, even though I know that there are standards, I thought, I started to realize like I'm going to carry this with me and apply it to myself with these new man standards and find ways to beat myself up. Thinking that I could escape from these female standards felt like an immense relief in the beginning. And then I realized that it wasn't going to help me at all.
Did you have these, I mean, as a kid, were you, a young child, were you sort of androgynous, tomboyish, or not necessarily?
Yes, very much. I had an older brother who I idolized, so I just wanted to do everything that he did. I was always trying to skateboard, and, I had short hair when I was a little kid too, and I wore his hand-me-downs, and no, but my parents were hippies, so it was, of course, nobody cared, and nobody thought, I mean, it's just like now when I hear parents saying like, oh, well, she or he likes these toys and clothes of the opposite sex. I'm like, what? There's no such thing. Like, I can't believe that people are doing that now. Like I thought we got rid of that in the 70s, So this is an attitude I've overheard of, people just dismissing girls as silly and cis and privileged. And yeah, I'm sure you guys all know about that.
Have you had any response?
Not from any of like the professionals that I've sent it to. I don't know what their reaction has been. I have gotten, of course, the obligatory hate mail and, kill yourselves, but not a ton. And then I've gotten a good response from like other parents and other detransitioners who, have said like, I tried to cover like all the bases and still keep it simple. So
yeah,
people seem to think I got most of them. And then people have said, well, you should have said this or that. And I'm like, I know, but it's short. There's so much to be said. And I'm trying to like boil it down to the basics. And this one is about the, the glitter families that this is something I experienced with everyone saying that, I'm a horrible mother. And because I would try to set like normal boundaries, like a curfew, that became transphobia.
right.
And then these other moms in the community would take my kid. And in some ways it was like, we really needed a break from each other because it was incredibly stressful in our household. And on the other hand, though, like I think it's been really harmful the way that everyone drove this wedge between us.
Yeah.
And there were problems. I look back now and I go like, wow, I really did a bad job as a mom when my kids were little. I was very stressed out all the time having their father die. And then I already had like emotional problems and mental problems and like ADD processing problems where like being alone with two young children 24 hours a day was like really hard for me to just handle anyway. And I needed like help, and I would go to try to get professional help. And that was completely useless because really all I needed was like another adult around to like make a casserole once in a while, you know, like or something.
Exactly,
Like,
really
and
simple.
so of course I ended up in a relationship with the first person that made me a hot meal, who was a complete alcoholic disaster. So you can just imagine it was like a cascading effect of badness. And there were
Yeah.
some good things, but I really feel now like I let her down and caused all this problem, you know, by making her feel
Yeah.
unloved. So I
Yeah.
feel really bad.
Right.
And you know, people say that they're not, you know, they're not doing this in school, but you can see the gender-bred lesson plan. They clearly are doing this in school. They're teaching it in schools. I was just in the high school and they have a trans flag up, you know. They're definitely teaching it in the school. That is a famous trans man who is very physically fit. And that was part of, you know, another part of it for me was like I had been going to the gym kind of obsessively and not getting any results. And then of course, like on testosterone, suddenly I was finally getting some muscles and stuff, you know, and I think that ties in with like the eating disorder population, maybe, you know, sort of been absorbed into this. Oh, and this one, you know, I was thinking a lot because I'm still struggling with like, what do I want to do for a career, even though I'm old now or older. But this was always a big thing for me. Like in my life, I've always been interested in cars, guitars, being in a rock and roll band, and all of these things that I could only ever find really men doing it around here anyway. And so that was another thing when, you know, when you are convincing yourself that you're trans, you go like data mining into your past and go like, oh, you know. But it struck me that like at the age when you are 15, 16 in high school trying to figure out what your career path might be, now everyone has to ask themselves too, like what their gender is going to be and how that those two things can interact. You know, it's just a huge existential crisis on top of already a crisis to make these kids consider this. Like the first time it occurred to me, I was asked at my regular doctor's office, like, are you the same gender that you were when you were born? And I was like, huh? And then that just planted a seed in my head, like, oh, I didn't know there was another option, you know?
Right.
So if they have these surveys at the school, which they do, they have these surveys all the time, and it asks them, what's your name? And do you have another name that you want to be called? Then that is forcing every single one of them to consider like, oh, maybe I'm not what I was born as.
Of course, because the medical industry, it has just like government has an authoritative role in our lives. And when we're growing up, or even when we're grown up and we're, you know, open, we're vulnerable in a very real human way, not in a negative way, but we're vulnerable to what's being said. And it's dangerous, really, isn't it?
Yeah, and I think it's a huge burden for a teenager, you know, like it was confusing enough for me and I was an adult when I kind of got sucked into it. So I just
Yeah.
for a child to be having to consider this is just like, why are we burdening them with another crisis on top of just the naturally occurring identity crisis that everyone goes through at that age? The other thing that's become a norm now is that you have this brand of yourself. Like everyone has a brand that they put forth on the internet, which when I was a teenager, you know, we would call each other posers. Like I wanted to be a skater, but I couldn't really skate. But if I had a skateboard, and I was holding it, then I was a poser, you know what I mean? And so that was a big thing. You never wanted to be a poser. And I remember being embarrassed by like selfies when people first started taking selfies. Remember, we used to kind of laugh at people. And when the selfie stick came out, we were like, oh my God, these people with their selfie sticks. But now there's no shame in it anymore. And everyone, it's almost like a default that you're going to have this brand that you put online, right? Like even with my other whole art stuff, like I'm putting that on Instagram all the time. And sometimes I'm like, ugh, why am I doing this? Like the endless marketing of the self. We all have to market ourselves now to make a living.
Parents basically sort of buying into the whole, you know.
Some of them do. Like there's that I keep thinking of that blonde woman who somebody posted under this, having a trans kid is the new shiplap, you know, and it's like, yeah, it is. Like, please just continue to give your house an HD makeover and leave your goddamn kids alone, you know, like.
What did you say is a shiplap? I didn't get that.
Shiplap is this white board that everyone has been putting inside, like they rip out the original interior of these houses and put these white boards up everywhere, and it looks like shit. And everyone, it's like the
Oh, okay.
home makeover trend, and it's like you could see these women treating their children like a home makeover project. So this is what my doctor looked like. This is kind of a drawing of my doctor. Yeah, and then the pressure they put on me to sign the informed consent form for my kid was like unreal, you know. I had changed my phone number because I was so scared of them. If anyone wants a copy of the zine or ask me anything, probably find me on Twitter is the best way. So it's just Reality Girl Zine. And I just showing this is it's been translated into all these languages, which I thought was pretty cool.
Wonderful. Perché così?
And somebody put it on a truck.